What if the world's biggest library isn't Google? It's a locked basement under Vatican City that you and I will never get into. Like, forget Area 51, forget Fort Knox. The Vatican archives are basically the final boss of secrets. We're talking about over 50 miles of shelves filled with ancient scrolls, lost gospels, maybe even alien fan mail. And the only way you're getting in is if you're the Pope himself, or like, I don't know, Liza Minnelli or something. That was a White Chicks reference, in case you were wondering. Welcome back to Don't Quote Me, It's Probably Nothing. I'm Kelly, and today we're diving headfirst into the juicy, spooky, sometimes very real, and sometimes very what the heck are you even talking about world of Vatican secrets. We're going to hit the missing books of the Bible, secret tunnels, rumored relics like the Ark of the Covenant, and yes, even wild theories about aliens, time travel, and the Vatican basically being a front for the Illuminati. So buckle up, light a candle, say a prayer if you want, and maybe don't drink the holy water if it's glowing. So before I get started, there's a few things I have to say. One, I am really, really high. B, you can listen to this podcast and like so many other cool ones. There's Awakening Radio, which is pretty cool. And then there's Two Girls, One Cut, which is like true crime stuff about serial killers. And then they just brought on a new podcast called, I think it's called Beyond the Mat. And it's a Brazilian jiu-jitsu guy. And I think he does MMA too, and he's a fighter, and he talks to other fighters. So if that's your thing, go listen to that and all the other ones on Nighthawk Radio. And it's on 24/7, and it's fantastic. And then D, my podcast was stolen, but I'm low-key kind of not mad about it. And I know exactly who it was. It was Michael and Jeremy. If you're looking for a new podcast, I highly recommend you checking out Michael and Jeremy Steal Your Podcast. So they take other people's podcasts and they do it better and apparently hornier. Their quote, not mine. But also their voices are very nice to listen to. They were soothing. It scratched my brain in a way that I didn't know it needed to be scratched. So yeah, that's what I had to tell you. And I'm going to go stare off into space to 10 minutes. And I'm going to go oh, look, a strawberry. That's what my brain feels like right now. I'm just trying to tell you that I'm going to go stare off into space for 10 minutes so that I can gather my thoughts. And then I will be back to talk to you about the Vatican and aliens. Okay, so let's start with the big one. The Vatican Secret Archives, which first of all, they rebranded in 2019 because Secret Archives sounded too sketchy. They changed it to the Vatican Apostolic Archives, which is basically when Facebook tried to make Meta happen. Like, yeah, okay, totally not suspicious anymore. But let's talk facts first, because these archives are massive. And if I was on video right now, you would see how far I'm holding out my arms. I'm holding out my arms as far as they will go, which is not far because I have short arms. But we're talking about over 50 miles of shelving, packed with documents, books, scrolls, and letters going back more than 1,200 years. It's like the Costco of hidden history, if you're thinking of the Costco that was in Idiocracy. But the wildest part is that most of it isn't even digitized. Like, they're still rocking the medieval filing system. Now, technically, the archives aren't 100% secret. Scholars can request access, but they can only request very specific documents and only if you're approved. So you can't just walk in and be like, yo, can I see the Ark of the Covenant? They'll like laugh you out of room. Which I feel like if I wanted to see something that's literally, I just walk and be like, yo, let me see that real quick. And then walk out with, you know, whatever it is, basically stealing the Ark of the Covenant from the Vatican. Wasn't that a movie? I think that was a movie. Somebody stole something. Yeah. What was I talking about again? Oh, yeah. So here's where theories come in, because if you have 50 miles of paper stacked under the Pope's house, people are going to wonder what's hiding in there. So some of the rumored contents are the lost book of the Bible that got cut out during editing, like the Gospels of Thomas, Mary Magdalene, and Judas, basically the Bible's deleted scenes. Evidence of aliens, letters, drawings, or ancient accounts of beings from the sky. And considering the Vatican has its own observatory, conspiracy people go, huh. There's also relics of power like the Holy Grail, the Spear of Destiny, and even the Ark of the Covenant, and prophecies about the end of the world probably locked up so people don't panic. The Vatican, of course, says none of that's true. They say it's just boring stuff like papal letters, financial records, and old maps, which, like, sure, because obviously 50 miles of recipes is way more than, like, alien fan mail. And I don't know why I said recipes. I don't know what I was trying to say there. If there's 50 miles of recipes in there, like, I want some of them, because I bet they'd make a good pumpkin pie. I don't even know what I'm talking about. But yeah, when you put like secret in the title, you're asking for trouble. Humans are nosy, and if you lock a door and say don't open it, we will literally want to open it so that we can see what's behind it. Like, come on now. My favorite theory is the one that the Vatican has documents that could completely rewrite history, like proof that Jesus had a family or evidence of civilizations before recorded history, stuff that could basically make Christianity or Catholicism crumble if it ever got out. And if you think about it, that actually makes sense, because what better way to keep control than by controlling the story? So whether it's just papal tax returns or the world's spiciest collection of lost gospels, the Vatican archives are the ultimate "you can't sit with us" library. What? And the fact we'll never know what's inside, that's what keeps the conspiracies alive. So let's talk about the missing books of the Bible. So here's the history part real quick. Back in 325 AD, Emperor Constantine brought together church leaders at something called the Council of Nicaea. This was basically the editing session for Christianity. They sat around a big table and decided what stories, letters, and gospels were officially in and which ones were out. And just like that, the Bible, as we know it, took shape. So the thing is, there were lots of writings floating around back then, and some were included, like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, but others were just cut out. And that's where theories come in, because the text left out paint a very different picture of Jesus and his crew. So let's start with the Gospel of Thomas. It was discovered in the Nag Hammadi Library. I was just about to talk in a southern accent. It was discovered in the Nag Hammadi Library in Egypt in 1945. So scholars say that what it says dates back to roughly the 1st and 2nd century. It's not a narrative of Jesus' life. There's no birth, crucifixion, or resurrection. It's 114 short sayings attributed to Jesus, often in punchy one-liners. And apparently, a lot of the sayings are like pretty zen or like a riddly spiritual prompt, and they were stressing like direct inner knowledge, like the kingdom is within you, and the idea that understanding Jesus is about a radical inward awakening. And some sayings undercut the orthodox ideas about faith as obedience and instead emphasize personal discovery and enlightenment. So salvation in Thomas's looks like realizing who you are, not assent to creeds. A few of the lines flipped traditional roles and said things about treating women as spiritually equal or even central in some passages. And that was a cultural and theological challenge for a male-dominated church hierarchy. This was problematic for the church because it fits with Gnostic tendencies: mystical, secret knowledge, emphasis on inner enlightenment, and sometimes a distrust of the material world, which Gnostics saw as corrupt. That theology clashed with emerging orthodoxy that centered on Jesus' death, resurrection, sacraments, and communal liturgy. Thomas reads more like a handbook for an inward spirituality that threatened institutional control, which often needs clear public rituals, text, and leaders to hold power. Next is the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. So fragments of it are known from a 5th century Coptic text and earlier Greek references. And it's short, but it's potent because it represents Mary not as a scandalous side character, but as Jesus' close disciple and spiritual interpreter. So the thing that's inside that is rattling cages is that Mary receives post-resurrection teachings from Jesus and then shares them with the other disciples, which directly puts her in the teacher-leader role. And there's like a famous thread of debate in the text where some male disciples, Peter in particular, are jealous or suspicious of Mary's authority, and she defends her vision. The text explores like inner visions, the soul's journey, and a psychological map of how inner obstacles keep us from awakening. And elevating Mary to a primary revelatory role undermines the male-only clergy model that developed in later centuries. If Mary is portrayed as Jesus' most trusted disciple and possibly his intimate companion in some interpretations, that challenges the near narratives about apostolic succession and the exclusive authority of certain male leaders. The Gospel of Mary is like the ancient mic drop. Mary hears Jesus, understands, and then gets the side eye from the bros in the room. Very messy. Okay, and then last we have the Gospel of Judas. It is also a Coptic manuscript that was first publicized in the 2000s and is believed to reflect a 2nd century Gnostic tradition. And it's written as a dialogue where Jesus reveals secret knowledge to Judas. So this is a conflict because it casts Judas not as the betrayer for cash, but as the most enlightened disciple, the one who understands Jesus' mission, and in obeying him, obeying his instruction, enabled the crucifixion, which in some Gnostic renderings is framed as a release from the corrupt material body. And then this text flips that moral because betrayal becomes obedience and the villain becomes the one who follows the true plan. And this racked nerves because Judas as a scapegoat justified the historical doctrine of sin, guilt, betrayal, and then redemption through atonement. Recasting him as the hero upends the whole thing. Plus, it also fits Gnostic ideas like the others, that the material world is a trap and escaping it can be framed as liberation, which Orthodox leaders couldn't allow because their theology made the cross the centerpiece of salvation in a very different way. So why are these texts excluded? Well, there's a few possible reasons. First, there's theology and authority. As the institutional church consolidated power, it favored texts that supported the public, communal, sacramental, and historically grounded Christianity, which is the crucifixion, the resurrection, and the apostolic succession. Gnostic writings emphasize secret knowledge, inward experience, and alternative cosmologies that undermine that structure. And then there's the data and usage. So many of these gospels are dated in the 2nd century, decades after the earliest texts, and were popular in specific communities. They weren't universally cultivated. I don't know why I said cultivated, because I meant to say circulated, but they weren't universally circulated or read in the main churches. And then there's political control. So a unified official scripture helped centralize doctrine and authority. Texts that promoted independent spiritual paths or that elevated non-apostolic authorities like Mary complicated that unity. And then there's practical reasons. Some texts contain theological ideas that the majority found confusing, dangerous, or incompatible with the ethical and social needs of early Christian communities. Which brings us back to the Vatican. The theory is that they've got more of these texts stashed away in the archives, ones that never made it to ever see daylight. Maybe even gospels that we don't know exist yet. And if that's true, imagine how differently we'd see Christianity today. Now let's talk about how these missing pages actually made it back into the spotlight and why the whole process is like a conspiracy thriller. So I'm going to tell you a bunch of little stories because I can. Okay. So first, the Nag Hammadi discovery, which is the Thomas and Mary stuff like I just talked about. So picture this. It's 1945 in Upper Egypt. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say Upper Egypt is the same as saying Upper East Side. Maybe not. Okay, so a local farmer or two, depending on which version you like, are digging by the Nile and stumble on a clay jar. And inside is a stack of codices written in Coptic, which I said Coptic 20 million times. You're probably not familiar, so I'll explain it to you real quick. So Coptic is ancient Egyptian language that was used mainly by Egyptian Christians around the 2nd century and on. So it uses the Greek alphabet with a few extra letters that they borrowed from an earlier Egyptian script called Demotic, and they use that to represent sounds that aren't found in Greek. So it became the liturgical language of the Coptic Orthodox Church and is still used today. And most of the surviving Coptic texts are religious works like Bible transitions, sermons, hymns, and theological writings. But there's also letters, contracts, and magical text. So I guess Harry Potter is written in Coptic. Cracked myself up with that one. Okay, so the farmers come across a clay jar, and that has a bunch of Coptic writings in it. And it turns out, you can't see me waving my finger in the air right now, but I'm doing it. But it turns out these were Gnostic texts, many previously known by only name or by hostile church references. And then suddenly we had whole books like the Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Philip, texts that gave scholars the missing vocabulary of the early Christian diversity. Cue the academic freak out. Next is the Dead Sea Scrolls. So in 1947, Bedouin shepherds outside Qumran toss a rock into a cave and hear pottery crack. So they go in and they find scrolls, which were biblical books and sectarian writings dating back to the Second Temple period. So these scrolls blew open our understanding of Jewish and early Christian life again. Small town discovery, huge global implications, immediate questions about ownership, translation, and publication. Then there's the Gospel of Judas saga, modern and messy and dramatic. So a Coptic codex surfaced on the antique market decades after being looted, and it bounced around private collectors and scholars, dealers, and eventually a major magazine and academic teams got involved. In the 2000s, after conservation and translation, the text was published and people lost their minds because the portrait of Judas wasn't what Sunday school taught you. But along the way, there were huge fights about authenticity, about the ethics of the archaeology, and about who had the right to publish what. So when something this old turns up, 3 things happen at once. 1, people want access to read and study it. 2, soldiers of national pride and collectors want control. And 3, institutions, including the church, get nervous about the narrative shifting. And you're probably like, why do some people point fingers at the Vatican? Well, I'll tell you. So there's a few reasons. The first is limited access and institutional secrecy. The Vatican archives and other church libraries are famously guarded. Scholars need approvals and sensitive material may be restricted. And when you have a closed door policy, humans invent closed door stories. Then there's the historical precedent. There are real historical examples where religious or political groups suppressed documents that threaten their power. So people assume that the Vatican would too. And then there's smuggling in the black market. Many ancient texts surfaced from the black markets because the government sometimes deals quietly within the black market to obtain them. And then lastly, there's the if it exists, it would change everything mindset. Countless legends say if this one scroll exists, the whole origin story is different. People want a single smoking gun manuscript that rewrites history. That one turns into a belief that the vaults must have it. Okay, so since I bored you about history, that I actually think is pretty cool and I loved it and I hope you did too, and I'm moving on because what's a good conspiracy without aliens? You might not think the Vatican, like guys in robes, incense, and centuries-old Latin chants would have anything to do with extraterrestrials, but buckle up because the rabbit hole here is deep and dark and hollow. Okay, so first of all, the Vatican literally has its own observatory, like telescopes, domes, astronomers in priest collars, the whole thing. It's one of the oldest astronomical research institutions in the world, dating back to the late 1500s. And in modern times, they run the Vatican Observatory Research Group out in Arizona on Mount Graham. Speaking of Arizona, they're actually a very good band, but they broke up. Like, I shouldn't say broke up. They're not together. They're on a break. We were on a break. Any Friends fans out there? But, yeah, they're on a break, I guess. They're not touring anymore. And their music was super duper good. And I found them kind of late in life. So I'm sad. But anyway, why Arizona? Apparently, nothing screams, let's look for aliens like setting up camp next to saguaro cacti and scorpions. But here's where the conspiracy fuel gets poured on. So one of the infrared instruments used there was nicknamed Lucifer, in all caps. Technically, it stood for something boring like, okay, I have to take a deep breath for this one. Okay. Large binocular telescope near infrared utility with camera and integral field unit for extragalactic research. Yeah. But once the internet heard the Vatican was literally looking at the heavens with something called Lucifer, it was game over and conspiracy theorists said, yep, proof, the Pope is in on the alien deal with Satan. Now let's talk popes and aliens, because surprisingly, popes have made some eyebrow raising comments. You can't see me wiggling my eyebrows, but I'm doing it. I can't wait to get a video camera. But anyway, Pope Francis said that if the little green men showed up tomorrow asking for baptism, he totally dunked them in holy water. Earlier, Vatican astronomers have gone on record saying that aliens would still be God's creatures, which is sweet, but also the kind of quote that fuels 10,000 TikTok edits of the Pope with a UFO hovering over St. Peter's Basilica. So what's the theory? Some people believe the Vatican knows aliens exist, maybe even has proof locked up in those archives we just talked about. Others think they're using the observatory to monitor UFO activity or watch for cosmic signs connected to prophecy. And then there's the wild version that aliens already visited in ancient times and the church buried the evidence because it would destroy the biblical worldview. Honestly, the funniest mental picture here is imagining like Vatican priests standing around a telescope, dead serious, saying like... Father, we may have confirmation of extraterrestrial life. And then immediately have to argue about whether the mass schedule changes if, like, ET shows up. Anyway, but here's where I think the fascination comes from. Religion is about the ultimate mysteries, where we came from, where we're going, whether we're alone. Aliens are the modern extension of those questions. So, of course, people connect the dots. And if anyone's sitting on the cosmic T, it's definitely the Vatican. Whether it's actual UFO files or just astronomers doing their thing, the Vatican and aliens conspiracy is one of my favorites because it's part science, part theology, and part absolute chaos. But, I mean, maybe the Pope doesn't have ET on speed dial, but the fact that the Vatican has telescopes named Lucifer and priests casually chanting about baptizing Martians, that's enough to keep the theories flying. But also, we must welcome Elf with open arms. I have 7 cats. He's not getting any of them because I love them all. Okay, so we've covered aliens, archives, and banned gospels. Now let's talk about the Vatican's basement. So the Vatican is basically sitting on top of a honeycomb of tunnels, catacombs, and hidden vaults. Officially, these spaces hold tombs of popes, early Christian martyrs, and relics important to the church. But unofficially, conspiracy theorists say it's basically the world's weirdest episode of Storage Wars. So here's what they have in there. So the first one is the Holy Grail, and that's the cup from the Last Supper that Indiana Jones went looking for. That's the movie, Indiana Jones. That's it. That's the movie I was thinking of earlier when I said the whole Ark of the Covenant thing. Okay. Some people swear the Vatican's hiding it to keep it from shaking up the church's control of Christianity. And then we have the Ark of the Covenant, and that's the big golden chest that supposedly held the 10 Commandments. Some theories say it was smuggled out of Jerusalem ages ago and ended up in Vatican vaults. Others say it's chilling in Ethiopia, but maybe the church has multiple arks, like Pokemon cards. And then there's evidence of extraterrestrials. Like, remember the alien chat we just had? Well, some people think the archives under the Vatican contain actual documents or artifacts proving aliens have visited Earth. Honestly, I imagine a Vatican library walking past the box labeled Roswell 1947 every morning. Like, it's no big deal. And then there's the ancient text that we never got to read. Beyond the Gospels we've already talked about, some say there are entire libraries of mystical, occult, and scientific writings hidden away. Stuff that might rewrite our understanding of history, science, or even the Bible itself. Now about the tunnels themselves. There are real underground areas, including the necropolis, where you can visit... Sorry for laughing. St. Peter's supposed tomb. I was just chuckling because Necropolis, I think there's a show and I think they call it Necropolis. I think that's what I'm thinking about. But anyway, there are also legends of deeper secret chambers only high-ranking clergy can enter. These are the ones people think hold treasure troves of relics, forbidden texts, and maybe even portals. Yes, some people believe the Vatican is hiding interdimensional gateways because of course they are. And here's my favorite theory, that the Vatican has a secret time capsule. Basically a chest full of prophecies and forbidden knowledge that they'll only reveal if the world's about to end. Like, hey everyone, surprise, we've had it the whole time. What makes this also compelling is that we'll never really know. The Vatican archives and vaults are heavily guarded, and only a tiny fraction of what's inside is accessible to researchers. It's like the ultimate locked door, and humans hate locked doors. You tell us we can't look inside, and like instantly we believe there's something life-changing in there. So whether it's the Ark, the Grail, alien receipts, or just 2,000 years of very boring Pope paperwork, the Vatican's tunnels and vaults are conspiracy gold. Honestly, I kind of love imagining a priest tripping over the Holy Grail on his way to file his papal tax records, like, oops, sorry, don't tell Indiana Jones, we've had it this whole time. I don't know why I'm even laughing at myself at this point. Okay, so up until now, we've been talking about gospels, hidden relics, and aliens in filing cabinets. But here's the thing about the Vatican. It's not just a church. It's also a country. A tiny country, yes, but one that plays the political game like a pro. And with politics comes, well, drama. Let's start with the Vatican Bank. The Pope basically has his own financial institution, and it has been accused of everything from money laundering to mafia ties. In the 1980s, the Banco Ambriasano scandal blew up when the Vatican Bank was caught funneling shady money. The bank chairman, Roberto Calvi, was found hanging under Blackfriars Bridge in London, allegedly murdered. Some say it was the mafia, others say it was tied to the Vatican itself. Either way, the headlines were basically like, Holy Father, unholy finances. Then there's World War II and Pope Pius XII. So historians are still fighting over whether the Vatican did enough to oppose Hitler and the Nazis. Some argue Pius stayed silent when he should have spoken out, and others say he worked quietly behind the scenes. Conspiracy theorists take it further because they claim the Vatican actually collaborated with fascists to maintain power. That's where you get rumors of secret deals, Nazi gold stored in the Vatican vaults, and clergy helping war criminals escape to South America via the so-called rat lines. Oh, and speaking of South America, there are theories that high-ranking Nazis and their treasures were smuggled into Argentina and Brazil with the Vatican's blessing. Picture this, like bishops with fake passports in one hand and like swastikas in the other. Yikes. But wait, the scandals don't stop at history. They go all the way into modern times. In 2012, we had the VatiLeaks, or VatiLeaks, however, you call it. But the Vatican had its own WikiLeaks moment, and documents were leaked showing infighting, corruption, and power struggles inside the Papal Palace. It was basically Game of Thrones, but with more cassocks and fewer dragons. But then there's also like the heartbreaking and horrifying scandals of sexual abuse cover-ups, which are sadly very real, not just even like conspiracy theory territory. Investigations all over the world have revealed systematic cover-ups by clergy and higher-ups in the Vatican, and some critics argue this culture of secrecy feeds the bigger idea that the Vatican is hiding everything, whether it's gold, gospels, or the truth. Of course, conspiracy theorists like to mix all these threads together: mob money, Nazi ties, abuse scandals, and secret archives. The Vatican becomes this ultimate shadow player, always pulling the strings, always one step ahead, always hiding skeletons, sometimes literally because catacombs. So when people say the Vatican is one of the most secretive institutions in the world, it's not just about aliens or lost gospels. It's because for centuries, they've been at the crossroads of faith, power, money, and politics. And that combo is like throwing holy water on a bonfire of conspiracy theories, which would probably put out the fire. All right, so we've covered secret gospels, Nazi gold, and mafia money. But what's conspiracy deep dives without some good old-fashioned demon talk? The Vatican isn't just about guardian relics and keeping scandals under wraps. They also keep literal exorcists on speed dial. Which, this is actually true, for real. There is a podcast called The Exorcist Files, and it's hosted by Father Carlos Martins, and he literally talks about his exorcisms that he's done, like with permission of the people that it happened to. But it is so wild and like literally so good, and I highly suggest you listen to it. There's 2 seasons out, but it's so good. God is good for sure. But anyway, the Vatican officially recognizes exorcisms are real, and they've got training courses for priests. They have official prayers, and every so often you get news reports about exorcists being overbooked because the demand is so high. Like, Sorry, Father Giuseppe can't come to your house today. He's busy wrestling Satan out of a teenager in Rome, which, yeah, sometimes the exorcisms can take like a really, really long time, actually. Something I learned from that podcast. Like on TV, they make it look like it's quick, like an hour. But like sometimes it could last actually up to a couple months, which is wild. But anyway, one of the most famous cases linked to the Vatican exorcist is Anneliese Michel in the 1970s. And she was a young German woman whose tragic death after multiple exorcism sessions inspired the exorcism of Emily Rose. And the Catholic Church later distanced itself from the case, but it lit the fire under the modern obsession with possession. And let's not forget the 1949 case of a boy in the U.S., the one that inspired The Exorcist. According to reports, priests performed dozens of exorcisms while furniture moved, strange words appeared on his skin, and he made guttural voices that didn't sound human. And the Vatican was briefed on it, and the case is still considered one of their most chilling modern examples. Now, skeptics will say that all of this is just mental illness, mass hysteria, or Hollywood hype, but conspiracy theorists take it further. They say the Vatican has an entire secret archive of supernatural cases, files of possessions, hauntings, even demonic artifacts they've locked away so the world doesn't freak out. Think of it like the Catholic version of the X-Files, but with more incense. But here's where it gets extra creepy. So some claim the Vatican knows actual rituals that can open or close portals, summon spirits, or bind demons. That's why their priests sometimes get flown across the world to deal with unusual activity. Basically, if your Ouija board session goes too far, you don't call Ghostbusters, you call the Vatican. And then there's the Pope Leo XIII story. Legend has it that in the late 1800s, he had a vision during Mass where he heard a conversation between God and Satan. Satan supposedly asked for 100 years to test humanity, and God granted it. Terrified, Leo went back to his desk and immediately wrote the famous St. Michael prayer, which is still used in exorcisms. If true, that would explain why the 20th century was, absolute chaos. Wars, genocides, atomic bombs, conspiracy theorists. But here's the real kicker. Whether you believe in literal demons or not, the Vatican's actions keep this stuff alive. They don't laugh it off. They train priests. They issue guidelines. And when a pope says, yes, the devil is real, conspiracy theorists eat that up like it's holy popcorn. Because if the Vatican thinks demons exist and they've got files locked away about the scariest cases, what else are they hiding in those archives? Ghost evidence? Angels? Honestly, part of me wants to sneak into those archives just to see if there's a folder labeled like, do not open after midnight. Okay, buckle up, because now we're getting into the part where the Vatican's secrecy looks a little less quaint and a lot more like a noir novel. This is the who died, why, and who's sweeping what under the Sistine rug section. Grab your rosary and your tinfoil hat. Okay, so let's start with the one that fuels more Reddit threads than any other. Pope John Paul I, Albino Luciani. It also could it could be albino. There'll be no Beano. Isn't that a commercial? The Beano commercial? Anyway, I'm just going to say his name's albino. Okay. He was elected in August 1978 and he died mysteriously on September 28th, 1978, just 33 days into his papacy. Officially, the Vatican said he died of a heart attack, but the official story left a lot of people squinting. So why the suspicion? So for starters, there was no autopsy. Not unusual for Vatican tradition, but it leaves questions. Conflicting accounts about who found him and who was in the papal apartments that night. Some early statements changed or were later corrected. The Vatican released only a limited amount of documentation, and people noticed gaps in the timeline of that last day. And then around the same period, there was huge financial scandal energy floating around. Banco Ambrosiano, secretive banking ties, and players like Roberto Calvi and shady Italian banking networks that were later tangled up with the Vatican finances. Conspiracy threads tied John Paul's death to a few things: that he was about to reform or expose financial corruption connected to the Vatican Bank, that Freemasons or the P2 Propaganda Do Lodge, a secret Masonic network in Italy with real political clout at the time, had reasons to silence him, and the mafia or banking interests were panicking over investigations he might have opened. And what's true is that we do know Vatican finances were a mess in that era, and very shady actors and deaths swirl around the same orbit. What's not proven is any clear evidence that John Paul was murdered, but the lack of autopsy, mixed statements, and later revelations about Vatican banking gave the rumor mill a feast. And then I'll drop this quick because it's the soap opera subplot. But it ties into the whole maybe they killed a pope vibe. So Roberto Calvi, chairman of Banco Ambrosiano, turned up dead in 1982, hanging under London's Blackfriars Bridge. And his bank collapsed with massive holes, and there were documented links between his bank, the Vatican Bank, and the P2 Lodge. People whispered mafia, politicians, and secret societies all had fingers in those little pies. I just pictured fingers, somebody holding like all 10 fingers up with these little mini pies just stuck to their fingers. Anyway, Calvi's death was eventually treated as murder by many investigators, and that scandal is part of why people suspect money and murder in Vatican corridors. This next one is a different kind of rabbit hole, but equally cinematic. On May 13th, 1981, Mehmet Ali Agha shot Pope John Paul II in St. Peter's Square. The Pope was critically wounded but survived, and Agha was captured, convicted, and served time in Italy. Now, the conspiracy tea is that he initially claimed ties to various groups: Turkish, ultranationalist, the Grey Wolves, Bulgarian agents, even the KGB in some of the theories. The so-called Bulgarian connections suggested Eastern Bloc security services helped coordinate the attempt, supposedly because the Pope was a thorn in the side of Soviet influence, because he had been very vocal about Poland and communism. And then over the years, Agha changed stories multiple times, naming different co-conspirators and motives, which made the truth slippery. Bulgarian and Italian investigators produced conflicting results. Some evidence supported some outside state links, other pieces fell apart. And then Pope's anti-communist stance, especially supporting solidarity in Poland, made him an ideological enemy of Soviet interests, so the theory that a state actor wanted him gone was plausible to many observers. But what is important is that despite decades of investigation, there's no definitive, universally accepted proof that the KGB or Bulgarian services ordered the hit. I think I had to say that. The Pope himself later met and pardoned Agha in prison, one of the odder, softer coda moments in the saga. There are a bunch of smaller, creepier items people mention when they're trying to prove the Vatican is a collection of secret hit squads. Sudden deaths of Vatican officials, odd disappearances of documents, and episcopal scandals that get quietly resolved. Some specific things that fuel these theories are popes and cardinals have occasionally died unexpectedly shortly after they were seen preparing reforms. Key Vatican officials who knew embarrassing financial or political details sometimes had sudden career collapses or strange legal troubles, and Vatileaks and other modern exposures showed internal infighting and power struggles, not murders necessarily, but lots of motive and means for cover-up. And here's where I put my little journalist hat on, because conspiracy thrives in gray zones. The Vatican is historically secretive. It's handled its own internal business with fewer public checks than modern states. There were real financial crimes and murky relationships with organized crime in mid to late 20th century Italy, and there were powerful secret networks like P2 with overlapping members across banking, industry, and politics. Those facts make conspiracy theories coherent sounding. But coherent sounding doesn't necessarily equal proven, because most of John Paul theories are speculative because we lack smoking gun evidence. And the Agha case remains contested partly because the Cold War was the era of compartmentalized ops and disinformation. So you can find 100 reasons to suspect foul play, and also you can find real reasons to say the safe explanation is still the simplest one. But if you like a story that has secret finances and secret lodges and sudden deaths and a Cold War assassination attempt, then congrats. You just found Vatican true crime. The palace doesn't have to be evil to be secretive. When power, religion, and money land in one tiny country, you get a buffet of motives and a centuries-long record of discretion that will always feed the conspiracy engine. And that's a wrap on our Vatican Secrets adventure. Hidden Gospels, shady banks, mysterious popes, and just enough unanswered questions to keep the conspiracy mill spinning for centuries. As for next week on Don't Quote Me, it's probably nothing. I don't even know what I want to talk about yet. So it's a surprise. It's going to surprise you and me. So we'll find out probably at the last minute what I'm going to be talking about. But before I go, it's time for my song of the week. If you've ever spent your teenage years crammed into a sweaty church basement or a VFW hall for a Battle of the Bands night, this one's going to hit you right in the nostalgia. It's by 5Pi, a Delco band from the early 2000s, and the track is called Let Fade, and it's got that raw, emotional basement show energy that makes you want to dig out your old burned CDs and flip your bangs to the side. Go stream it. Seriously, it's a vibe. Until then, stay curious, stay weird, be kind to someone for no reason, and go be amazing.
Yeah!